have this beautiful picture from the Renaissance, and most of the emphasis in the textbook is just about the art of the Renaissance, about how beautiful the paintings are. So again, with the class, I would partly be checking how many of these words they understand and know. This painting is called the Ideal City. So already we have a word in English that's important, ideal. This is partly about beauty, it's partly beautiful, but it's partly political. It's partly making a political statement about what kind of society people wanted in the Renaissance, right? So the Renaissance ideology of the ideal city. Okay? What do we see in this city? What do we see in this painting? The textbook, the assigned reading, mostly talks about the techniques for why paintings were beautiful in this time. Some of this is true, some of it's just about technology. So this is the first period in the history of the world where they used oil painting. Oil painting. So again, in English, you have to check with the class. Do they understand oil? So this is not gasoline, this is not other kinds of oil. This is the same kind of oil we cook food with today. But actually the paint is made of oil. So this was a new technology. The textbook talks about this. Another idea is geometry. So again, check. Do they really know what I mean by geometry? Geometry and perspective. So check. Maybe the students need to know the Chinese word for perspective or some of these other concepts. So for the first time in the history of the world, we have correct perspective, correct geometry. But there are other important things about this picture. What is the ideology of the Renaissance? This is showing you a kind of balance between religion and going back to ancient Rome. So this symbolizes Roma. This is ancient Rome, but this building, this is a Christian church. This symbolizes Christianity. And there's something else very important here. Slavery. So I know you can't see so clearly. This is a black person from Africa. You should visualize. Okay? So this is in Europe. This is Rome. But one of the ideas from ancient Rome they wanted to go back to was slavery. So already, this picture is very political. This tells you a lot. The Renaissance is not important just because they had beautiful pictures or beautiful ideas. There's also something quite scary, something quite terrible about the Renaissance that this picture is showing us. And part of the glory of ancient Rome, part of their power, was that they did conquer Africa. So the Roman Empire included North Africa, and this painting is saying, in the future, we can again conquer North Africa. We have a lot of ideals and ideology what to do. So here is another very beautiful and very famous painting. You can see I have a little bit of Chinese to help the students, from the history of the Renaissance. This painting is called Two Schools of Athens. It shows you the philosopher Plato and the philosopher Aristotle. Again, in one painting here, we have a lot of the ideas of the political philosophy of the Renaissance, right? And the meaning of Renaissance itself. So one idea about the Renaissance is that people in Europe had stopped reading Aristotle, had stopped reading Plato, that European culture was controlled by the church, and that at this time, starting in the year 1300, 1330, there was a revival, there was a Renaissance, there was a rebirth. Yeah, we have this idea of rebirth, of interest in the ancient philosophy of ancient Athens and ancient Rome, so Kusila, Roma, and that this was a struggle between the new idea of humanism, so humanism is also an idea within Buddhism, between humanism and the ideology of the church, the control of the Catholic Church. Really, this is not true. Really, this is misleading. Where is this painting? This famous painting that shows the beauty of ancient Greece and this philosophy, the painting is actually inside the Vatican. This painting was paid for by the Catholic Church. It was paid for by Christianity. It's actually inside the home of the Pope. So the relationship between the Christian ideology and between the Renaissance ideology, they were not really enemies. It's a little bit complicated, but the idea of the Renaissance, it is not simply about humanism against religion. So I say here, it was not an anti-Christian movement in the simple sense. Okay, could you go back one slide? Why is this so important? Why is this period of history so important? So you notice in the textbook for the students, the Renaissance is chapter 1. This is the beginning of the textbook. They choose this as the most important beginning of the history of Europe. Well, before the Renaissance, before 1300, England is not an important place in the world. In fact, in China, they had never heard of England. Before 1300, France is not an important place. And sorry, not just China. For example, China and India. In India, they had never heard of these countries. They were not famous, they were not important. From the perspective of India, Africa, China, and Japan, Europe was not an important place before the Renaissance. And then, from the year 1000 to the year 1300, approximately, Europe is at war with the Muslim world. Europe is at war with Arabia. Okay? This is part of the Dark Ages. It's also part of the Byzantine Empire. It's very interesting that the textbook does not begin with this period of time. Instead, it was this time. So I just mentioned, this is an interesting idea when you think about the textbook. Why begin with the Renaissance? Well, before the Renaissance, the Roman Empire included Syria. Today, Syria is in the news all the time. There was war in Syria. This is also a political decision. Earlier, but before the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, even Afghanistan was part of the Greek and Roman world. Still today, we have war in Afghanistan. So the wars at this time, right now, we do not want to talk about. We are uncomfortable talking about this history, whereas the Renaissance, we are more comfortable talking about. After 1300, during the Renaissance, this is the period when Europe begins conquering the whole world. So before the Renaissance, really Europe is not such an important place. After the Renaissance, Europe is conquering and destroying India. Europe is conquering and destroying what becomes Canada, Mexico, South America. This changes the whole, and Africa. Okay? And then just at the end of this period, this ends in the year 1600. The year 1600 is the same year you have the first European living in Beijing, China. This is the beginning of European influence in China. And we see this also is part of the transformation. So we talk a little bit about the technology of the paintings. Why are the paintings so beautiful? Obviously, the technology of the boats, the technology of warfare, it's in this period. So to give one example the students might be interested in, this is the first time in the history of the world one boat goes all the way around the world. This happens for the first time Europeans during the Renaissance. Why not China? Why not India? These are also good questions. But the answer is not just beautiful paintings. So the textbook tells you about Petrarch. Petrarch is the most important historical figure. If I'm going to give the students a test, Petrarch is the most important famous person associated with the name of the Renaissance and with humanism. So in humanism, this is still an important idea, even in Buddhism, even in Taiwan. I think we still talk about this idea of humanistic Buddhism. Okay? Who was Petrarch? Why is he so important? Most people will tell you, and the textbook will tell you, oh, he's important because he wrote beautiful poetry. Okay? Most people say Petrarch started the Renaissance. He was the first man in the Renaissance. Petrarch invented humanism. So this is misleading. Petrarch was part of an actual revolution. It is true that he was a poet. It is true that he wrote beautiful poetry. It is true that he was also part of the church. You can see from his style of clothing. It's a very strange style of clothing today. But also he was involved in politics. So there was a real revolution in Rome in the year 1347. At this time, the point of the revolution was to stop the social system they had and return to the style of government they had in ancient Rome. So the textbook mostly talks about this just as an aesthetic, just as a style of art that they wanted to go back to ancient Rome. No, there was a real, they really changed the political situation. Okay? And this revolution lasted for only 1 year. But 1 year feels like a long time. If you were alive at this time, and Rome was the most important city of Europe, everyone watched this history. This was a very important moment in history. Okay? Here's the other thing. Petrarch discovered letters by Cicero. So at this time, and for the next 500 years, Cicero is the most important philosophy. He is the most important. Today, nobody reads Cicero. Today, nobody reads Cicero, but for 500 years after this point, he was the most famous, most important. And this man, Petrarch, he was a poet. He goes to the library a lot, and just by luck, just by accident, at the library, they goes, he finds an ancient book. He finds a book more than 1,000 years old, and nobody had read this book before. So he becomes famous because he found this book. So I can tell you more about this book. So Petrarch is also the first person to describe the history of Europe in terms of the Dark Ages. So this is very important. Next slide. See this. So we keep using these terms linked to revival and rebirth. What did they want to revive? Did they want democracy? Was the point of the Renaissance to return to democracy with a system of voting? The answer is no. No. Cicero, he's this very important philosopher, actually was not pro-democracy. So there were many ideas from ancient Greece and ancient Rome that were interested, not democracy. So 500 years later, Europe becomes very interested in democracy, but at this time, they're not interested. Next slide, thank you. Very strange. From our perspective, it's very strange. So in both Europe and Asia, every period of history has beautiful art. Every period of history has poetry. If you ask, why is the Renaissance so important? The answer cannot be because of the art and poetry. It cannot be just because they're important. At the same time, in India, they have beautiful art. At the same time, in Mexico and in China, they have beautiful art. But there's something very important happening in Europe. It's connected to the beautiful art. Okay, so this is this idea of the Dark Ages. So I give the Chinese here. It's a very vague idea. The idea was, in the ancient periods, like everything was really good. We don't know, civilization and culture. And then everything, because of Christianity, because of the Christian society, everything becomes worse and worse. For maybe 1,000 years, everything is really bad. And then afterwards, everything becomes good again. Why? Because of the Renaissance. So this is a very powerful idea. But if you ask, well, what is this? 100% of what? It's an idea about civilization. So to show one meaning. But it is not a very specific idea. So we mentioned Petrarch introduced the idea of the Dark Ages. The two ideas are linked. You only know what do we mean by darkness. We know relative to light. So we have to talk about this. We understand darkness. What do we really mean by light? Okay, next slide. So this is the map of the Roman Empire, right? And everyone wants to forget this. Well, the Roman Empire went far, far, far to the east. The Roman Empire included Africa. Take your video, right? This is Turkey and Greece, and here are the countries of Western Europe. Next slide. This is the Dark Ages. This is the Dark Ages. And this is the extent of the Islamic Empire, and this is only a few hundred years later. It's 750 AD. So the Roman Empire, it really ended in failure. Most people don't want to discuss this. And then there was a huge empire that we are not talking about. So this is Spain. You should see by now. Even Spain was part of the Islamic Empire. You see, next slide. Okay. Then this is afterwards. So this is more than 1,000 years later. Okay. It never ends. So the idea that the Dark Ages ended and we went back, that we revived, that we restored the Roman Empire, it's not true. Okay. In fact, the Muslim world, in fact, the Arabic world, the Ottoman Empire, became more and more powerful. They still controlled all of North Africa, and including Greece. You should see that. It's an important part of Europe. And this also became controlled by Muslims. So, again, what really would be the idea of restoring the Roman Empire? Something else happened with the Renaissance. They did not take back the Roman Empire. Right, so again, same idea. Before, after. Before, after. So instead, what does Europe do during this time? Europe goes out and conquers the rest of the world. And this is really a period of slavery and genocide on a huge scale. So you can imagine with the students, I want to make sure they understand what we mean by slavery and genocide. These are beautiful pictures, but the reality of what Europe did instead is very scary. And this includes Asia. This includes places like India, includes Canada, includes Mexico. Okay, so don't worry, we're at the end. I'm trying to go very quickly. So conclusions. We have, again, this beautiful picture. Again, we have this reminder that in this period of history, this was ultimately about slavery, about reconquering Africa, about taking slaves from Africa. So this is part of the picture, part of the ideal city of the future during the Renaissance. Next picture. Okay, so here I would ask the class. People say the Renaissance was an anti-church and anti-Christian movement. Is this true or is this false? Also, this is Dante. The textbook talks about Dante. So if there are real students, I'd ask them, you read about Dante? What do you think? Was he for the church or against the church? Ask some questions like this, okay? So you probably know the answer already. You are adults, you speak English very well. No, actually, this is very complex. Really, it was not a simple anti-church movement. They worked together in a strange way. And he was a very religious person. Next question. Okay, another question. During the Renaissance, people became less and less religious with fewer religious wars. Is this true or false? Okay. The textbook is very vague about this, doesn't it? In fact, this is false. There was more war. The religion became more dangerous and more crazy in Europe. This is the period when there start to be wars on a huge scale, with huge numbers of people being killed. So actually, Europe becomes more religious. There's more war. Probably this is in chapter 2 of the text, or maybe chapter 3. There will be more lessons on this. This is just the beginning of the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, people started reading Aristotle again and demanding democracy, right? So even in America and Canada, most people believe this. People start to read Aristotle, people start to care about democracy. So we already talked about this. Actually, this is false. Really, it's false for 2 reasons. One, Aristotle, they never stopped reading Aristotle during the Dark Ages in Empire. And 2, actually this time, democracy was not the political philosophy. Instead, it was the political philosophy of Cicero. Next. People say the Renaissance is just a style of art or literature, and this is included even in the Chinese name, the idea that this is just about art and literature. The art is beautiful, but the main point of my lecture is to say no. The most important ideas do not have to do with art and literature. So yeah, this is also something to discuss with the student. Maybe the most important question. Why was humanism so important 600 years ago? Is it still important for the same reasons today?